All right, thank you very much for coming here today. I'm Jacqueline MacArthur, and I'm feeling pretty excited and lucky to have gathered the speakers that we have here today. They are the top of their game, and as you'll see, they're potentially ahead of their time. And how do I know that? The three parts of my career as a finance journalist, an environmental and agricultural advocate, and being part of a farming family are converging. There's big change in the wind, which means big opportunities, big risks, big egos, big gaps, big demands. But most of it, ultimately, is about land. It's about how we value it and use it, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So we chose the 29th of August because it's about the very last few hours in the calendar year that any farmer, the flat-out farmers around here anyway, could pay any attention. So we're all heading into shearing and irrigating and turning off lambs and hay cutting and harvest and maybe half a day for Christmas. So we thank you for coming here today. We also know that you've got a lot going on and even more than usual. Let's mention it. Input costs are eye-watering right now, and commodity prices are not nearly where we would like them to be. But we've invited you here for a break from all that, just a couple of hours with really good food. We have a French chef here for lunch. We're here to take a look at a potential future. We're here to get a better understanding of the large and long-term and unavoidable changes to what will be valued in the global economy. Today is an introduction to a work in progress, a demonstration project, the River Country Biolink, which aims to make a small start on designing an aggregated product to maximise this region's best man-made and natural capital assets. In what some people are calling a new gold rush, farmers like us may be asked to decide between food and fibre, carbon drawdown and renewable energy. While it'd be easy to accept that combined land use is the future, a key factor for farmers will be the potential returns per hectare. When Australian farmers have become some of the least trade protected in the world, the dollar is a key determinant of survival in drought. Will 1 hectare of food give a greater economic return than 1 hectare of solar panels, or 1 hectare of carbon farming, or 1 hectare of native habitat and biodiversity in the predicted green Wall Street markets? These are the decisions farmers will be weighing up. Here, we want to flip the focus onto something more intriguing. What if the future we want actually attracts 4 types of returns, not just an individual financial one? And what if that financial one is greater because we've addressed it this way? So we're asking the question, what if looking at our whole mid-river delta and joint projects like hydrated biolinks helps to tackle the main 4 losses associated with land degradation and removing water from the landscape, of which we've seen a lot of here. These losses are a loss of hope, a loss of social networks, biodiversity and economic value. And instead, the 4 returns would aim to regenerate the landscape. The aim is to regenerate the landscape to create the 4 returns. And we'll be talking about those in more detail in further discussions. So now's a good time to introduce David McDonald, the chairman of Western Murray Land Improvement Group, and Sally McDonald and Stephen Monk, who've displayed the kind of patience and generosity it takes to get an opportunity like this biolink design off the ground. There has literally been a lot of water under many bridges since we first met a year ago to discuss the possibility of a biolink project as a way of examining the potential opportunities and the risks of environmental market projects in our region. This project was and is very much driven by a spirit of inquiry and is a work in progress. We like talking to each other. I'm assuming this, I'm pretty short now. But we like talking to each other because we share the need for some space and some time for critical thinking about how the future of carbon and biodiversity markets will pan out. We all think it's better to be full of questions now and seek the kind of independent experts we have here today than be pressured by those who we all sell to or to governments or middlemen down the track. Land use changes on your farm and across our landscape will not work if it's deemed urgent and all about them. That said, we've asked Andrew Woody, the co-founder of the Regen Farmers Mutual, the only Australian farmer-owned environmental goods and services broker, to join us today. Western Murray Executive Officer Roger Knight and the board picked up early on Wardy and RFM's other co-founder Rowan Clark's call to co-design a new mutual by the farmers for the farmers, and it's been a fascinating ride so far. Today, to give us an abridged version of the revolution now rolling across global accounting and investment and banking and tech and supply chains, we have a couple of farmers who've seen a few seasons, that's Stephen Monk and David McDonald, to ask Woody some pressing questions about the state of play.
We're going to fire off. Yeah, right. Well, as a result of our previous workshops that we've had, we were made aware that next year there'll be some legislated requirements for big business to report on their carbon emissions. Can you explain what that's all about?
I'm doing my best. Thanks, Steve. Hey, Crockett, how are you? So, there's a golden rule, and if you're a Christian, it's do unto others what you'd have done to yourself. But if you're a capitalist, it's the person with the gold makes the rules. And what we're seeing in the golden rule is it all flows from governments setting targets. So we set a target around Paris, around 1.5 degrees cooling, and we made carbon dioxide equivalent the measure of getting to that 1.5 degree cooling. At the last big COP where they all got together, they said we need to do for climate, well, we need to do for environment what we did for climate. We need to find that factor for biodiversity measurement, and then we need to start valuing it. What they're all seeking to do with these frameworks, the TCFD, the TNFD, the science-based targets for nature, is try and work out how to measure and value climate and environment. And what that means is those costs were previously externalised to organisations, and now they're going to be brought into organisations. And the way that happens mainly through this actor, the International Financial Reporting Standards. Let me try and help you out there, because there's a lot of acronyms. Basically, they say we now need, in order for you to do a financial report, you're familiar with putting in a balance sheet and a profit and loss. But to be IFRS compliant from next year, you also need to show us your Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. So they're your direct costs, your immediate input costs, and the component costs that make your input costs, the Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. So as farmers, we're in primary production. Apart from mining, we are the start of the economy. We are the inputs that then get manufactured into bread and food and fibre, and all of our clothes and everything that happens in the rest of the economy starts with the supply shed that is run by farmers. So pretty much the whole of the world is looking at farmers.
Where's that starting though? Where's that starting? When we say next year, that's not starting with farmers. Where does that start?
Well, it starts with, so everybody has an interest in the farmer's carbon. So the banks have considered, when they've signed up to the International Financial Reporting Standards, that their emissions are the sum of the emissions to everybody that they lend to. And there's not a farmer usually without a mortgage. Industry have decided the same. So McDonald's, Scope 3, all the way, all of the fast food companies, or everything that you've eaten at a restaurant, their Scope 3 emissions are the sum of the farmers who supply them the ingredients that go into the burgers and the chips that they sell to everybody around the world. I think I mentioned to you, there's this thing happening in McDonald's supply chain at the moment. I'm not sure why this isn't moving. You mind move it manually? But, you know, you can start to see it when the banks are offering their farmers, come for a free 2-day workshop and understand your carbon footprint. Why do the banks want to put on these roadshows? And it's not just Rubbo, it's every single bank. because your footprint as a farmer and every other farmer that banks with them is the sum of their Scope 3 emissions. So it starts at these large businesses. So McDonald's, for example, is Chicago-based. They're a massive multinational. When they raise money from the wholesale finance market, they do a $100 billion bond issuance. And the difference between being IFRS compliant and not is 1.5%. So of course they want to save $1.5 billion a year on their bond issuance. And so they turn around to Fulton's Market Group here in Australia, who are, that's still not working. Fulton's Market Group are the buyer for McDonald's, so that McDonald's don't end up at the same sale yard competing against themselves. They have one organisation manage all of these things. And they turn around to Fulton's and say, well, what's the carbon emissions of our burgers? And the Fultons go, hang on. And they turn around to 20 abattoirs along the east coast between Townsville and Tasmania and say, what's the sum of the emissions of all of the farmers? And the abattoirs go, shit, I don't know. We better find out. And they've got till the 1st of July, to answer you, Steve, to work this out. So 9 months from now, if you imagine you can have a baby in 9 months, in 9 months, every farmer in Australia is either going to understand their own carbon footprint and be able to show that for this year and show it for every other year. And if you don't do that, they're going to estimate it on your behalf. And then they're going to send you the bill or pay you the premium, depending on what your footprint shows them. So this is just a slide from what we're doing with McDonald's, where we understand that the value is now not just what do you sell, whether it's a tonne of wheat or wool or beef, but also how does what you sell impact the climate and environment. And that has previously been externalised, and it's now being internalised as a cost for farmers. And the question is, should the farmers have to wear that cost? And as farmer-owned mutual, we're trying to say, no, well, hang on, the carbon that we have to produce in order to produce the food, that should be paid for by the supply chain and ultimately the consumer. And so working with great organisations to try and understand how this traceability of carbon and what's coming after carbon will work. Sorry, Steve, I can keep going with the questions, but you only asked a quick one. Go for it.
Yeah, could you tell us a bit more about the pressure on primary producers along the supply chain and what will that look like?
It'll look like soft pressure initially. Come and get your carbon footprint done by your bank. That'll put it on for you. As we get closer and closer to the 1st of July, if you don't have a carbon footprint that's recognised, I think you're going to start to see a greater squeeze, and you might get an invitation from your supply chain to join their carbon program, and their carbon program will start with an assessment of your farm footprint, and ultimately it'll end with, because carbon projects work like this, right? If you're planting trees, for example, there's not much sequestration happening when it's a little tree, so there's 5 to 7 years where you're not earning any carbon sequestration income. All you've had is costs. But over the course of 25 or 100 years, farmers, we have photosynthesis. We're the only ones that are bringing carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into trees or biology in the soil or out as products. So, you know, they all want to fund you as supply chains, as banks, as industry, as everybody, into these projects where you've got the first few years of costs and delays until income, because they know over the course of the 25 years, they need the carbon that you're going to sequester. So you're going to start to see it start with friendliness and education and wanting to help you, but they're ultimately going to want you to grow trees for them so that they can offset the costs of transport and energy and all the other areas of the economy that they have to engage with in order to take the food that you've grown all the way to the consumer.
Yeah, so what actions will be expected of us to take towards decarbonisation?
I mean, there's sort of a few things that you want to try and do.
Well, that's all going to come back to us, is it?
Yeah.
Because we're the only ones.
You want to measure now, right? Because nobody else, all they can do is avoid putting out previous emissions that were counted. So reduction of carbon. When we say net zero, it's not no carbon being emitted. It's back to 2005 levels. Now, 2005 was before the iPhone, but it wasn't exactly the Stone Age, right? Like, we'd had the Y2K. It was a pretty good standard of living. But we actually need to reduce our carbon footprint, and the carbon intensive things in agriculture are fertiliser and fuel and herbicides. They have massive carbon dioxide equivalents to them. So there'll be not just the price signal of fertilisers and input costs are getting harder and harder to afford, but also when they start factoring in the carbon cost of a molecule that's this long and has 150 syllables in it, when that gets reduced to carbon dioxide, that's going to be a pretty costly molecule as well. You've just got to remember, you hold all of the aces. Ultimately, as farmers, we are the only actors that have photosynthesis, which is the only technology which is safe and proven and able to take carbon out of the atmosphere and do something useful. Turn it into food, turn it into soil fertility, turn it into forests and plants. So there is this degree of you will need to understand and measure your footprint, and you'll have to do this annually. You'll be making 2-degree plans. You'll want to see your reduction of high input carbon equivalent fertilisers, etc., because it's going to cost you more to put those things on. So anything you can get from nitrogen from clover will be better than nitrogen that you have to buy in off the back of a truck, for example. And those sorts of things are going to promote working with nature. The other sorts of things you can do are engaging carbon projects or biodiversity projects. The challenge, though, is that in Australia, the way that the carbon markets were set up, you'd almost believe that they were set up by somebody who didn't believe that the market should be there. They're not designed for mass adoption. It was really hard as an individual farmer to make the economics of a carbon project work. And what I'll talk to you about later today is how those economics are only made sensible by getting together. And by getting together, what you can do not only grows more trees, but it's in a more coordinated way that has a bigger benefit for biodiversity and hydrology, etc.
I'm not sure if this is going.
Yes.
It is going, yes. The other thing is, of course, our relationships with our bankers and our lenders. How's that going to work, whether you're in the black or in the red by the $50?
I think, this is just in life, it's better to be in the black than in the red with the banks. But the banks are very acutely aware of this coming stuff. They're not sure how to handle it because their ag book is incredibly exposed. But when they look at their ag book and they look at all the other things they're invested in, transport, housing, industry, mining and minerals, those things are only emitting, right? So they also want to nurture good relationships with agriculture because that's where they can get their carbon for, and it's very hard to get carbon out of those other industries they bank. CBA is one of the more advanced of the banks. Westpac and NAB and ANZ, they're all interested in this as well. What are the sorts of things that they're happy to provide green loans for tells you what they're interested in. Protecting waterways, particularly interesting in this basis, so they're all worried about the methane coming off dams, and they're going to probably give you an interest-free loan to fence off your dam and turn it into a biodiversity hotspot. They'll give you an interest-free loan or reduced interest loan to set up a carbon project. Interesting though, you can't generally do a carbon project in Australia without getting what's called eligible interest holder consent. So ultimately the bank is determining whether you can or can't get into carbon projects to start sequestering carbon on your own farm so that you can meet net zero requirements of your supply chain. This is
well, following on from that, tell us a bit about the down the line impacts ahead in the terms of environmental, social and governance requirements, and what those impacts are likely to look like.
Sure. So this is an ecosystem map of logos of large organisations that are interested in environment, social and governance, ESG. Now some of these organisations you won't have heard from because they're new logos, it sounds like a new acronym. But some of these players are the same old, right? External assurance through PwC, KPMG, Ernst & Young, right? The Standards and Poor's of this world, the Moody's, the rating agencies, they're all in this. And it just goes back to what I was initially saying. Previously, we operated as capitalism without any concern to climate and environment. Some smart boffins and policymakers, recognising this as a vote winner or vote loser, have decided we can't keep doing that. So governments have made laws that are saying things like, by 2030, like 60 months' time, we're going to have reduced our carbon footprint 43%, right? And it's not a lofty ambition, it's regulated into legislation. So carbon is the thin end of the wedge. What we're having to do today to report scope 1, 2, 3 emissions to scope a 2-degree plan, to lodge them from the 1st of July 2024. What's following is biodiversity. They're going to want to know, how did you impact endangered species? How did you impact the local environment? And you're going to have to report on that. And, you know, if you're doing a good job, you'll get, hopefully, payments reflected in that commodity that you're producing. It won't stop with carbon and biodiversity. Their voters and consumers are interested in say, the McDonald's case, deforestation and animal welfare and anti-slavery and things. So all the environment, all the social stuff, all the governance, what we produce, wheat, wool, beef, whatever, and how we impact ESG is ultimately going to get factored into everything. And we are the start of the economy as primary produce. Everybody else is just taking our inputs and value adding.
Surely we're the only one that's on the right side of the ledger there.
That's why patience and getting together and having that negotiating power, if they divide us and take us on one by one, a bank will take your carbon there and a supply chain will take his carbon there, and we won't have any negotiating power, we won't have any clout. If we are collectivised and we understand we've got photosynthesis, the environment that everybody is so frigging concerned with, we own it. It's on our it's on our farms, right? You know, we're the ones with the ability to actually affect hydrology, flood and drought. We're the ones with the ability to provide habitat range and help the endangered species. But we've been taught for 30 plus years about individualism and ultimately having locus of control at the individual level. But, you know, the most self-interested thing you can do is get to a scale now where you can actually afford to have an impact on an influence on how these things are going to shape your industry. Otherwise, you know, it's same to you, Maggie. If you don't have a plan, somebody else has got a plan for you. And at the moment, they're well ahead of the game compared to you. They've been doing this in mining and minerals for 10 to 12 years. Agriculture's sort of waking up to it. and not really screaming very loudly about it. All right. Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry.
Where's all this, who's going to tell us all about this? I mean, there's a lot of people that are not aware of this that we sort of talk about coming in 2024. Where's all that's going to come from?
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here, but what about the people that are not? I mean, who's going to do all this assessment by the 1st of July 2024?
I mean, look, I've been in a conversation, and I can't say, well, one of the banks, and they start with N, and a remote sensing technology. And they basically said, well, what do we think it's easier to do? You look at the average age of an Australian farmer and they're stale, male and pale. Are we going to get them to get technically literate, carbon literate and start reporting on this footprint? Or are we going to buy remote sensing satellite software and estimate their carbon from above and make out the difference? And
send the bill.
And send the bill. And so actually what I think they want collectively is those that are interested, and in Australia you've got 50,000 farmers that earn less than 50,000, let's call them hobby farmers. You've got 100,000 farmers that earn between 50,000 and 2 million, that's where most farmers are. And then you've got 6,500 to 7,000 farmers who earn more than 2 million a year. Those that are earning more than 2 million a year annually, they're probably going to be able to afford and probably have the advice, and their banker's probably interested, and they'll find a solution where they measure their carbon footprint with their bank in a 2-day seminar, and they continue to work down that path. It's you guys that are hard to educate, hard to work with on a one-to-one basis, and may not have the cost benefit for the bank or the supply chain in working with you one-on-one. And they're going to just measure it from space and send you the bill. That's their plan.
And what about all the people that live in the towns and so on? Do they send them a bill too?
No, the way that this works is unless those people are putting inputs that go into their supply chain that they have to report on, what happens in Australia, those international financial reporting standards come to Treasury into a thing called the Financial Disclosures Unit and into the Australian Accounting Standards Board. And then those people say, okay, well, this applies to companies that are earning initially 100 million in revenue and employ more than 50 people. And so no farmers are caught up in that, by and large. And so it's not a problem for agriculture. It's going to come in year 26 or year 27 and year 28. And by that time, we kind of know how this gaff works. Well, that's according to the policy wonks. What they don't realise is that McDonald's and Cargill and all of these big food companies, they earn more than 100 million a year and they employ more than 50 million people, and they still need to report their scope 3. So technically you might not fall into the law because you're not yet of the revenue and employment size, but practically it doesn't matter because the person that you sell to falls into that category, and so they need to ask you, and if you can't tell them, they're going to guess on your behalf. It's that level of simple.
One last question. I'm hoping it's going to be a positive. Hoping it's going to be a positive for this area. How's it going to affect the capital values?
Well, the slide that I was going to put up has people with their head in the sand. I don't know. I reckon that the whole factoring in climate and environment is probably a 5 to 8% input cost. That's the one, right? And if everything else remained equal, you would say that the impact on your capital will be 5 to 8% positive, negatively. But with other inputs being bigger in agriculture, like seed, fertiliser, the price of the dollar, being so much of an impact on agricultural businesses, to actually know how that 5 to 8% of carbon and environment is going to impact, I'm not brave enough to make that prediction. And I don't know, anybody who tells you that they know, has a pretty powerful crystal ball, or they're bullshitting.
Now, a good segue from the future and what's finally being valued is to have a look back at the start, at the very start. So a major theme of today's discussion is to ask the question, is our place, our mid-river delta, a landscape that will hold special interest in the future because of its inherent and exceptional environmental value? So we've got Colin Pardo there, there he is, beaming in from Canberra. The next discussion is unique to this place and this part of the world. I'll introduce Dan. So Dan's well known to many people here today, but for those who haven't met him, and he won't really love this, but he's our version of a Renaissance man. He's a former farmer and a forester, an ecologist, birdwatcher, hunter and cultural heritage consultant. Colin, who's in Canberra at the moment, and he can't be here because he has to spruce up his house and buy more grog for his 70th birthday on Canberra on Friday. So Colin's a bioanthropologist and an archaeologist, and we have been very lucky to have indentured him to return here as often as he can. So Dan says that he and Ant Jones from Deniliquin Local Land Council, who's also an extremely busy cultural heritage consultant and expert in natural resource management, these two do most of the work while Colin makes everyone look good. Please welcome Dan and Colin and Ant.
Thank you. I'm just going to say something, Colin, before I allow Colin to kind of kick off. Challenges, eh? How do we... that was pretty daunting stuff when you're looking down the gun barrel, that kind of stuff. And I suppose for me, I've always liked challenges. The bigger the challenge, the bigger the opportunity. And I think that's really what we're looking at. This is a lifetime opportunity, is what we're talking about here. The changes that are about to occur that you've just heard a really quick summary of are going to transform this landscape. It's up to you to decide whether and how much you want the control over how that looks at the end of the day. So why are the three of us here talking about how things were? Really because it's to inform you. We all care passionately about rural communities, and I just see my role as providing as much information to as many people that are interested as is possible, and maybe they can decide whether it's relevant and whether they're interested in using it to make decisions and to better inform themselves for the future. That's really where we're coming from. So the work that we do goes back from a personal point of view. It's like, how do we, how did this landscape get to where it is now? And how do we best understand that? And how can that inform where we are able to or want to take it to the future? And archaeology is an evidence-based science that can provide information on that. And the uniqueness of the archaeology in this area is profound when you start to understand it. And it's evident. You are all aware of it, you've all come across it. You walk across this landscape and it's there in varying ages, going back tens of thousands of years. How people occupied this landscape, the choices they made around how they managed their landscape, and the social impacts that that had on themselves, their economies, their cultures, is unique on a global level. How we can learn from that is really, I think, is really important, because it can inform us about how we can move forward, what is sustainable. This area, you're looking at sustainable management for thousands of years prior to the last, say, 150. We may not have the same choices. We may choose other things, but not to look at that and not to evaluate that and incorporate it in some way in our planning for the future and the decision making, I think is foolhardy. So that's the basis of where we're coming from. Colin, do you want to kick?
Yeah.
No. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, can you? Oh,
Oh, he's gone. Okay, well we'll just go to the slideshow and just kind of kick off from that if you can, Lee. So, while Lee's finding the slides,
Doing well, mate.
I'll just waffle on. So, the part of the landscape that we're specifically talking about is really west of the Cadell Fault. I suppose we really want you to understand that. There's a geological fault line that runs roughly from Echuca to Denny. We're talking about landscape that's west of that. The creek systems, the river systems over time through to kind of Kylite, that kind of inland delta-y type, that kind of capillary of rivers and creeks, that kind of area. That's the specific area that we're talking about. We're not talking about Lachlan, we're not talking about, you know, the Murrumbidgee, we're not talking about Albury. So we're actually talking about the area that you all live in. And there's a few features around that are pretty consistent across that landscape. Now, some of you may be aware of all this stuff, and some of you may not. So please excuse me if I'm already kind of teaching you how to suck eggs, but for those of you that don't, we're just going to kind of persevere. Thanks, Lee.
Oh, there he is.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. The connection. So I'm sorry, everybody. The connection. I don't know what happens, but I'm here. Okay. Am I talking now?
Yep.
That was the time. So I should just go, Dan?
Yep.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I wish I could be there, but I can't. Dan sort of said everything really we need to say. I'm just here to provide a bit of padding, I think. But the archaeology, I just want to start off by saying that the archaeology, selfishly, in this area is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It's something that is so instructive about people across the world and the opportunity to see not just locally and specific things for Barapa people and their neighbors, but tells us something about humanity around the world for much of our lives. And we've got just a very simple little timeline here, which, if you look on the far right, you can see that the Pollock villages and the villages of the Murray floodplains currently occupy a very small bit of the whole time that people have been in Australia. We've got, of course, Lake Mungo that everybody knows about that goes back quite a ways. We've got geological things that are happening with the Cadell Fault changing the shape of the land, and the environmental changes of climate, like, you know, the ice ages, and changes, very significant changes to the environment that also affected people. Not only how they lived and where they lived and all that, but also what they looked like. And we'll come back to that Kubel Creek and Cow Swamp burials, two burial areas that have been hugely instructive in our understanding, but kind of weirdly, because of the ownership and control that Aboriginal people were trying to get some sort of a measure of ownership and control over their heritage and their lives. Skeletal remains sort of get returned and repatriated and reburied, and we kind of lose the information that was learned from them. But the people from 15,000 years ago buried in these places, Kubel Creek is right beside the Biolink area, and it's probably one of the most informative sites to go under the radar. About 1.5 kilometers away from the proposed area. So you've got this, on the one hand, this older little bit of information about people living in the area, moving into the modern era of the last several thousand years, And if we went on to the next slide, Lee.
Yeah, coming.
There we go. So we sort of bounce around in archaeology. I'm very much more sort of spatially interested in, but the environment that we see today, which Dan was talking about, you look at the archaeology and you think, well, there's a bit of a mismatch there. And there's a lot of historical information in this area, possibly some of the best historical information in the country that occasionally it's overgeneralized, as you might think with things like Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu, which pulls on a lot of this historical information from the floodplains area, from the Barappa, Wamba, Yorta, Wadi peoples along the rivers. But they were living in a wetland, which was very, very different to what we see today. And these are just some observations. And if we could go on to the next slide. Lee.
He's done it.
Next slide. Thank you. This goes in.
Well, this I can speak.
One of those odd things.
I can speak to this one, Colin. So this is a satellite image from a freely available, a publicly available satellite website called a Sentinel Hub, and there's a number of renditions you can put on the images to get different kind of representations, looking through different lenses, for want of a better word. This is an infrared image, and it's looking at, so blue is wet and yellow is dry. So the thing that I'm trying to point out to you is that we all know that there's various areas across our landscape that are being protected or managed in some ways, national parks, state forests, river, creek systems, this kind of stuff. I'm not interested in those. I work in those, but it's not going well, right? From my point of view, or from the environment's point of view. So if you look at Kundra Paracuda, for instance, which is an internationally recognised Ramsar wetland, right? It's one of the driest places in the environment. So that's just giving you a taste of what the problems we have are. So I'm more interested in all this other country, which is the country that you guys are on and your communities are on, because it's a bigger area and it's easier to get things done. The one thing that's great about farming worlds and agriculture is that you come across problems and issues all the time and you solve them as quickly as you can and autonomously. You're very good at problem solving. You do it yourselves. These areas have problems and solving them is really, really difficult and takes a long time because of the number of vested interests within those areas. So, easier to make a difference out here, and this is the area that we're talking about today.
Excellent, okay. There we go. It's a terrible thing, but these earth mounds are wonderful, wonderful indicators, which are simply where people live. They're where people live, and they build up over several thousand years. And they're full of baked clay from the ovens that are in the ground that are the main things that build it up. People pull clay out to make little heat retainers to use in the ovens. There's the soil from just living there. There's the housing that rots down, the rushes that would be on the floor, the wood, and so on. And they build up, and they're very, very distinctive. You would have all seen them. They're very distinctive when you're walking along around wetlands, around little water bodies. There's usually a little depression near them, and they just don't come out in photographs. But we had the opportunity to document, first in an ad hoc way, and then it's become more and more directed as time has gone and we've moved with the conservation efforts and all that. And this is Patterson's Curse, or Lachlan Valley Bluebells, or Salvation Jane, depending on your state. And that shows you the earth mound. The Patterson's Curse is in flower right across a very, very large mound. And one of the nice things about these earth mounds is that they're, if you think about them as actual real estate, and you think they're housing blocks. And the best locations have the largest mounds, which suggests that people obviously knew probably there first and probably their larger families or something like that. And this is at Pollock Swamp, where it's right at one of the more favorable locations, and you get a bigger earth mound. You get smaller earth mounds dotted around the place. So they're very, very distinctive things to see. They're not at all difficult. There's a few traps for young players about identification and that, but the other thing we've been very fortunate in this area is that there's a huge number of people that are well-trained and well-versed in heritage survey and identification. And this is just another picture of what the place looks like when it would have been in action, when people would have been living there. And this is just an image where the size of the earth mound is relative to the size of the dot. And it gives you an impression of the structure of a village where you've got something not dissimilar to little streets. You've got two major clusters of settlement on either end of the swamp, but you have a whole range of housing beyond that. And what we came to with this was that it was a very simple, if you think about this as the distillation of individual decisions about where to live with regard to resource, then the archaeology tells you something about people and their relationship to the environment. And that was what guided us to a place like Pollock Swamp, thinking, what would it be like to put water in here to see how this place would have functioned? And here you see just images of the mounds, small ponds that have been dug out. So on the left there and near the top, there are these small ponds that are also dug out that have some effects with the local hydrology. There's, as you know, there's minor little efforts will produce a big change in the local hydrology that might cover several hectares and would be relevant to people putting in weirs, trapping fish, allowing water ribbon and such to grow. After Pollock Swamp and the successes of that, the team of the Joint Indigenous Group guided through the Moamba Land Council, did a survey of several places throughout Kundra Forest. And this shows you, again, just taking the total area of the earth mounds for each village site or each hamlet. And you start to see a structure of where people live, which is kind of like a road map. If you join those all up with the levees and the creeks, the main channels, you'd have like a road map of where people lived and how they interacted with one another over the course of the last, let's say, 4,000 years. And it's very different. It's this funny sort of thing that I always gloss as hunter-gatherers love swamps, farmers like to drain them. And so people are living right in the guts of what we look at as something that is something you have to get away from. You know, floodwaters are coming in, you have to either move or get away from. And yet, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you're living in the middle of this amazing ecology, which is so productive, shown here by the sort of range of animals and plants that some you depend on directly, but like all life, you're depending on everything indirectly.
So I might just cut in there, Colin, just a bit. And so this is the kind of stuff where I cut in, right? So you've got the idea that the archaeology can give you an idea about locations and what people were doing and where they were doing it, and why is that informative? Because it's directly linked to what the environment was like at that time. Now, if you go to this mound, you find large-bodied fish bones. If you go to that mound, you don't. If you go to this mound, you find turtle bones. If you go to that mound, you don't. So it's very, very specific. So you start to build up an idea of what was going on at that time and where the resources were. What's interesting about those village sites is that each one of them is next door to what was a highly productive wetland. Large, extensive wetlands. We're talking hundreds of hectares. They're usually downstream from those wetland sites. And that's the wetland site that I want you guys to be focusing on. Because that's where your biodiversity is, that's where your carbon sink is, that's where your potential is. So what Colin's talking about here is why this is relevant, is because it can focus in on specific points in your landscape that are important to you. So this is really just showing the food web of what's going on. The removal of water from the environment chops this at any one given point and then impacts up and down. It cascades in both directions. So you start to take water out of the landscape, you're impacting any of these. If the frequency of the flooding goes, some of these start to get impacted, which relates in both directions. Aboriginal cultural heritage was right in the centre of that. It can actually inform you about all of these. What was where and how much, and how productive those actual wetlands were. Do you want to go on to the next one, Lee? This is just a quick flash of how landscape can change over a relatively short period of time. These are 3 aerial shots of the Pollock Swamp. 46 is the first one over there. Over this side, I don't know whether you can see, but it's predominantly open water. That's still in living memory. And then you've got alterations to flooding patterns, and the frequency of flooding starts to diminish, and you get red gum infestation, and you end up with where we are now, which is all but a couple of hectares of a 200 hectare swamp, completely choked out. So they may not be as evident. I suppose where I'm getting to with this is some of you may have seen this occur, some of you may not. So when you go out, it may not be self-evident what was there over a relatively short period of time. The landscape's changing all the time, and it can shift really, really rapidly. So understanding again, where the archaeology can actually help you determine what was going on, as opposed to what you're looking at now. Next one, Lee. Colin, you want to talk to this one? This is Blandowski.
Yes. Again, this amazing historical record reaching into the this is about 1860, where a scientific expedition to Gunbower actually was settled for several months, and these diagrams, they're your usual historical diagram. They're a pastiche of things, but they give you just an idea of so many things that are going on with resources like the catfish that is being held up on the right, the size of the net that is either going into or coming out of the lagoon there, the various things people are doing, the drawings of what fish actually live in these places. You know, they're going there exploring and experimenting. But Aboriginal people in this expedition, Aboriginal people show up right throughout everything that they're talking about, everything that they're describing. It's all in together. And the scientific expedition is learning heaps that they wouldn't obviously have learned otherwise. The names for all these fish, the actual Barappa names were given, their habits, their food value, all that sort of thing. And the next one, this one also has the stuff they're chewing is actually the typha or kumbunji root. Here's another one which I think, obviously some are, again, artistic license because somebody does this, the bloke doing it, a guy called Kreft, does the sketch, then gets drawn up into an actual drawing, then gets turned into a lithograph. So there's a lot of artistic license, but when you look at those little, what look like little huts, they appear to be on these little raised areas, and I'm almost certain that these are actual interpretations of the earth mounds and the housing, but done in a way, you know, maybe slightly different. But if you look at the front, there's a lady dealing with a weir, just that is right there, and almost certainly there's a pond right behind it. And the pond would have been dug out to get clay to make the heat retainers for the fires. But again, you can see village life. There's plenty of people around. They're engaged in all sorts of activities. They're there for maybe 5-6 months of the year. And they're in close proximity. And regardless that there is some historical license in this picture, when you are at the Pollock or when you're at any of these little hamlets or something, this all becomes very evident. You can see this happening in front of you, in your mind's eye. And if we go on to the next image, keeping in mind that weir, that's Diarna there and Amos. Now, that lady in the 1860s image, it's not a big stretch to think that she would have been Diarna's great-great-great-great-grandmother. And here we are just running a little experiment, just putting a little weir in at the Pollock, just to see just how simple and what they do. And it's these sort of things that I was saying about minor changes, minor inputs like this that can have quite substantial changes to the local hydrology, holding back the water, just changing it a few centimeters. But as you all know, on that floodplain land, that can have small but real consequences, particularly if you're fishing for the whitebait or if you're looking at the productive ground for these reeds behind or water ribbon or typha.
And they inundated with freshwater fish, with Murray-Darling rainbow fish, which were attracted by the turbulence and by the improved oxygen. So within minutes, it was a pretty slow flow there. There isn't much velocity. It's actually a delivery point, so it's relatively slow. You know, a couple of meters a second maybe at the most. As soon as we put the weir in, literally within minutes, the fish were there. So you get these, you know, experimental archaeology people call it, but you don't actually find out until you do something, you know. You want to go on, Lee?
Yeah. And here we are. Now, I hope we have the time, and John has the inclination to talk about these whitebait, but I'd have to say, coming in with this whole gang, this whole community of all you people, everybody around who's so interested in all this, and it's like, selfishly, it's a gift for me, and it's just awesome. You know, you get to look at this wonderful archaeology of where people are living, how they're organizing themselves, what they're doing, and archaeology is really not much more than that. But when we started, I'd have to say we went along and we were learning more and more through the building of that levee and all that sort of stuff. We then looked at Pollock Swamp and we're mapping that and thinking about what was going on, thinking, let's put some water and see what it looks like. Selfishly, again, for me, it was a chance to look at how these places would have looked when they were in full operation, when people were living there. And what was probably more uppermost in, certainly in my mind, and I think in the visibility, was the birds. And you think, bird breeding ground, Brams are listed wetland, that we're all focusing on the birds. And I'd have to say my understanding and my sort of interpretation of the archaeology has changed in a small way, but absolutely completely. And it's because of these bloody little fish. And and who would have thought that you would end up with the likes of John Connellan coming along and saying, well, as it happens, these little fish are something amazing. Now at this point, I look at this, and this to me is possibly the whole rationale for the Barappa and all their neighbors moving in and settling in this way, going after these little fish. This, where my mind is right now, is that this is possibly the whole rationale for their whole social organization, their whole way of living. And yes, there are all sorts of resources there. I mean, the ribbonweed is amazing resource. The typha is an amazing carbohydrate, you know, your sort of staple food. And all the big fish that everybody goes on about. But when you're in there and you can see like that, you can see all that plant life, but they're pulling this. And this is the kind of research we like to do.
Yeah, go on to the research. Yeah, go on to the next one.
Yeah, so that's the results of monitoring. And you know, what the monitoring, there's casualties, you know. And then you do your research and you get a result and you think, that was a fine feed. That was a really good feed. And I'm not going to talk about this further because I'm hoping that John can just more cogently and more realistically talk about that.
So how can, yeah, I'm just going to interrupt and kind of push on, Colin, because there's other people want to talk. So how can that inform us? How does all that help? So the basis of this is where we based around where we decided to put environmental water, even though it's within the state forest, blah, 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 but that was the basis of it. It's based on the archaeology, it's based on the cultural activities within that site. And it's not a short-term fix. This is a long-term game. This, you know, a recovery from, we don't even know how close to zero we are, and we have no idea where we're going. But this is just a graph that I kind of pulled together specifically for the pollock, and it looks at wetland bird species that we recorded at the pollock. So that's in the blue, going back to 2015, and you'll see there's a steady incline. It's improving. Now, if you look at the orange, which is the number of those water birds that bred, or the number of species that bred, starts off low at about 5. Then we got the 2016 flood event, massive influx of migratory birds, right? Hits just over 2022. Drops off again after that, even though we're still putting water in, but the species number's still increasing. They're just not breeding. So, and then we hit 2022, 23 last year, and bingo. We're up to, what are we up to? 25, 30 species breeding. So that holding period in between those two flood events where we were continuing to increase that local population was vital. So this is what I mean by you need that slow incremental rise. This is not a short-term fix. At the moment we're getting these spasmodic floods, but you need to maintain it. You need to keep, it's about local population. Sure, you're going to get your big migratory influxes and whatever, but you've got to build up your local numbers again. Go on to the next one, Lee. So this next one is really interesting actually. It actually says a lot. So this is looking at last year, and it's looking at carp populations, which are in the orange, and blue is native. This is fish species, again at the pollock. Two different nettings, one that occurred at the beginning or early December during the flooding. The second one was towards the end of January, right? A big breeding colony of water birds out there at that stage, right? Thousands of pairs of birds. Massive decline in the carp population. They just smashed the carp. Not over 90% reduction it was. Now, if we think about, if we tried to go to a place and reduce the carp population by 90%, imagine trying to do that. So what I'm encouraging you to do is to think smart about this stuff. By getting a breeding colony, you can control carp numbers. We didn't get that figure anywhere else in KP because there wasn't the bird population to do it. Didn't wipe them right out, but it smashed a big hole in them. So when you're thinking about your land management decisions, you need to think about how you can incorporate the power, the natural power within the species that can work with you. You don't need to give them much of a hand, and they will come in and make a massive difference. That's really what I want to leave you with. It's not all engineering solutions. It's looking at things like this, and how can I tap into this and get this working for me? So and that's what we can provide you with. That's really where I'm coming from, is we can give you some insight into those kind of things. So there'll be people here who remember breeding colonies on their properties. So if you know, and that's the kind of information that's really valuable. That anecdotal long-term information, and how do you capitalise, where are the situations, what's the biodiversity that I can improve. You need to really focus in, you know your box. You know, wherever, you know, intimately, miles better than anything else. And that's going to give you a much better and a much more accurate, and it's also going to give you the control over the data as well, rather than a satellite image making an interpretation and a number that they just want to come up with, and you've got no control over. So this stuff's available. This is why we're here, because I think this stuff's really exciting. This is a chance for you to really take hold of your own kind of destiny and work out how your block wants to. It may not be fish on your block. It may be something completely different. There may be remnant sand dunes or something. It really doesn't matter. The same philosophy. You can apply the same theories to any landscape and you'll get the same kind of results. You just got to do you've just got to think about it a bit, come up with a theory, apply it, monitor it like hell to see what the responses are, and then tweak it. I think that's us, isn't it, Lee? Thanks, Colin. Thanks, everybody. And we'll take questions later. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. One, go back to party preparation.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll watch for a bit. Can I watch for a bit?
Yeah, sure. You're welcome.
Just take your mic off if you don't mind.
Thanks very much. All right. Yeah, that's a bit of a rally cry from Dan. It's always interesting to see, and it's pretty indicative of that conversion. The land stewards, so ecologists and First Nations and farmers, we've got an enormous amount of tacit knowledge already. So there's multi-generational knowledge about this, and now as markets conversion and the revolution rolls on, that knowledge is increasingly important. So we've got two resident ecologists here today, Maggie McDonald and Dr. John Canallan, who are going to talk to us about the nitty-gritty, the details. How does this work? What are we doing on the biolink? How are we looking at this, and how are we coming up with a frame, I guess, to look at biodiversity and ecological restoration that resonates with farmers and is built to have an impact. So this is part of what's underlying some of the legislation that's been put up it's actually a world first in Australia. So they're attempting to lead the way on a voluntary national market for biodiversity certificates. And so the Nature Repair Bill, Market Bill 2023, is unfortunately it's stalled in the Senate and pending more bipartisan support. It does need a review. There were 400 submissions that you can read in the. Yeah, there's actually an excellent, if you're interested, parliamentary bill summary of many people who wanted to take part in whether we should have this type of legislation and whether we should lead the world in coming up with biodiversity certificates. But what we're going to talk about here is what is nature repair, and also who's going to do it? How does it work? Just small questions.
No pressure.
All right, well, I'm going to steal the mic first before I hand over to this one to talk about fish, because we won't be able to stop him. So as Jack said, we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of what is biodiversity on our farms, what we can do about it. But just quickly, following on from Dan and Colin and Ant, and from Wardy, I'm just going to quickly talk about the why, because I think that's really important for everyone that's in the room here today. So you're going to hear more from Wardy later on today about our Biolinks project that we've been working on with Crockett and with Stephen for well over a year now behind the scenes. But our aim is to look at what can we do in our landscape, which is this landscape, this incredible landscape full of creeks and rivers and floodplains. And that's why this is all relevant. So this is why the archaeology and the history is relevant to us as farmers, because our uniqueness as a delta in the middle of this river system is that these wetland and aquatic systems, if they're functioning well alongside our agricultural production, that could be our key to coming through this. And that could be our answer to some of the really scary questions that Wardy brought up this morning. So just let's start with that. That's our why. But yeah, John and I are just going to quickly go over the biodiversity, the nuts and bolts, and what we can actually impact on our own farms. So obviously we've come together as a community, a lot of you here in this room, co-designed with Roger and Roger's team, a vision of what we wanted these forests in this area to look like. And I think this is a really important statement to circle back to and to start all of these conversations from as a starting point. So the community vision that we came up with together was that we want a healthy working forest where native species can flourish and where local communities can connect and co-manage the forest for future generations. Now, what we see potentially happening through these biolink projects is this vision extending out in between our national public assets, which Dan had a map of earlier. Yeah, all right, so just a bit of an orientation. So this is our Kundruk Paracuta Forest. This is Barham, this is where we are today. This is the Polack Swamp, which Colin and Dan and Ant have spoken about. And over here is our Gone Biolink, which we've been working on with Stephen and Crockett and Sally in extending these areas. So it's all connected, which is an important part of this. So what are the factors and the metrics about biodiversity that are on our farms that we can be impacting and we can be monitoring and recording our changes and improvements in? So most obviously it's our physical conditions. So this doesn't just impact our crops, but it's also our trees, our native ground cover, and then that impacts upon our species composition. So you've got all of our different species in our food web, which support the trophic systems and supports our landscapes. And then we've got our community structure, which is stepping out one step again. And that's where the landscape scale approach is really important, because it's not just what's on one farm, it's about what's on all of our farms together to create an area where wildlife really wants to come and it wants to be here. And that starts to impact upon our ecosystem functioning. So that's everything. It's our carbon cycle, it's our nitrogen cycle, it's our water cycle coming in and out. And then that leads to external exchanges. So that's where there's water coming into our landscape, and then it's actually leaving our landscape. And what is it taking with us? Is the water in better condition when it's leaving our patch to impact further downstream? Or is it maybe in worse condition? And what can we be doing as land managers to help that along in our little patch? And it's our absence of threats. So that's our invasive species, which again, we all know that if we work together as a community at a landscape scale, how much more effective our management of foxes, rabbits, etc. can be, which makes sense. So, inland wetlands, might be time to let the fish doctor talk about fish.
Thanks, Maggie. So my name's John Cannell and I work mostly internationally working on wetlands and food security, nutrition security and poverty alleviation. I think the word aquatic tribes that you've seen described earlier really describes who we still are today. It doesn't matter whether you're a farmer, fisherman, a hunter, community, water skier, we're all related and reliant on hydrated, good operating landscapes. With that hydration of the landscape, that increases biodiversity and it also increases your carbon storage sequestration. So we're looking at a situation currently here where our landscape is being dried up through the loss of irrigation water and things like that. And that's actually going to impact you further in relation to your ability around biodiversity and carbon. Just in relation to how does all this operate and how would you use it within markets and things like that, all of this is measurable. How you agree on what 3 fish equal in a biodiversity credit is still somewhat undecided. But it is measurable, and it is measurable at a scale where on farm you can actually come up with these results. So as they're talking about, before you get handed what all of this is, you should actually be being proactive and taking forward how you actually wish to see it. The measurement and things like that, there's heaps of nerds around that can help you to do stuff like that. Dan showed you in relation to the actually ability of biodiversity to work for you. All of these birds were breeding, got massive problems with carp, wipes out 90% of your carp problem. If you can bring that into the management of your farming and the way that it's done, that's something that you'll be able to drive forward without changing your operations so much in a way, but just looking at it from a different perspective. And so Wetlands Working Group and others here, they work with you in relation to your on-land hydration of your landscape. When I worked in Africa, I told them they weren't sheep or shoat farmers because they used to mix sheep and goats and cattle. They weren't cattle farmers or sheep farmers or goat farmers, they were rain farmers. The whole point of my work over there was to rehydrate the landscape, not through irrigation but through rain, and so that they didn't graze it back simply to the ground, that they remained grass and things, and that's how we work together. Also what we were talking about, and we'll get into that next. So what I want to say to you is all of this is measurable. You already have it and you have the ability to take it forward on your terms. The process seems relatively difficult, what's going to happen with the international finance, other big acronym words that you used, but this type of stuff that already exists on your farm, we've been doing that since the 80s. There was Greening Australia, there were all of these activities that started off, but what they didn't have, in my opinion, is it didn't have a linkage to a market or something else, so they became just government grant schemes that just went on and on and on and didn't have somewhere else to go.
And you don't get affirmation that way, because then you have this reliance back and forth, and that big agriculture does or has not in the past respected what I think communities around here have respected for a long time, and that's interplay between biodiversity on your farm, and whether that's because you like shooting ducks or catching Murray cod, or you are such a thing as a conservationist, or it's because you see the value of that socially to yourself, to the well-being of your family, or you see it, which would be about 2% of farmers, that it actually contributes to your productivity and increasing things such as insect resistance and things like that. You will never hear me use the word conservation. I hate that word. Because for hundreds of thousands of years, humans have seen hydrated landscapes as production units. So what was presented before, around the 3,000 year occupation of the sites around here, they were not seen as conservation units, they were seen as production units, socially, ecologically and economically. And they're still that today to all of us here, and they can actually be improved so that it goes further forward. So Dan's showing the photo of us consuming those small fish, and don't ask me for my ethics permit number on that. I may be evasive. That those are still production units that we are not tapping into. And you want to talk about carbon reduction, footprint and ethical standards of food acquisition and things like that, I'll take you there right now, and you'll never have to shop again. I mean, these are supermarkets. So all of that work that I'm telling you about that I do overseas, I'm helping them to keep their supermarkets productive and economical. And that's their wetlands. And that's their hydrated landscape. So this to me is showing a productive, hydrated, social, ecological and economic landscape that can help you on your farms, possibly through the dry times. So don't look at these things as conservation units, look at them as production units, another part of your farm.
And aren't we lucky to have these production units on our back doorstep? Because a lot of farming communities don't have these. This is a really unique asset that we hold. And if we can frame it in the right way moving forwards, the opportunities that can come out of it, who knows? But we're all part of this system, whether we want to be or not, we are here, and it's time to choose what part we're playing in this system, and to do it together, and to write our own rules of how we're going to be taking this forwards before the satellites come and it's done for us. So the nuts and bolts. This is an example of some of the nerds work that John was talking about. That there are frameworks that exist, there are metrics, there are parameters that we can use to start valuing and collecting data from our own back doorsteps and from these unique environments that we hold. And this data unlocks opportunities for us moving forwards. If we don't collect this data, we don't have those opportunities. And so it's time to start now and looking at what we have and where we're currently sitting and where we would like to get to and how we can do that together. So that's just one example.
So this just gives you a practical example of how you can use measurement units within what you're trying to do. It brings in together a framework that's quite well respected, and so when you're designing how you're going to approach the market or whoever it is as a collective, you actually do have published cited tools to be able to do that.
Yeah, we're not starting from scratch yet.
And I should just clarify, when I use the word hate, that's a very strong word towards conservation, because I really like conservationists, some of them at least. But I just wanted to clarify that statement.
All right, so another aspect of this, and coming back to markets, which again Wardy's going to be touching on later in the day, but it's the idea of core benefits. So a lot of the existing markets out there talk about carbon purely on its own, as its own entity, and oh yeah, over there in the corner there's a couple of co-benefits. They might happen, but the environment might get better overall, our social health, our well-being might get better, but that's just, it's a co-benefit, it doesn't really matter. What we're here for is the carbon units to take to market. But we don't think that's right. And so we're bringing you together to co-design what is right for us. So this is an example of some core benefits. This is work by the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, that they have put together these core benefits, not as co-benefits over in the corner, but as core benefits to these projects to actually ensure longevity and our access and opportunities into these markets.
And just locally in relation to these, this is what you have to define, and then I guess the big question then comes down to how do you measure, and I don't know whether that's proceeded or whether that's going forward, but how you measure that, that's what will be important in relation to what comes into your market.
Yeah, and the last one, but certainly not least, is our social values, and that's us as a community. It's our well-being, it's coming together, it's using our local knowledge, it's using our traditional knowledge from this landscape to inform all of the work that we're doing. I think everyone in this room has experience with stakeholder consultation that isn't really inclusive, and you don't walk away feeling as though you've achieved much. But that's just me, and I won't talk any more about that. So we're interested in real co-design and coming together from the ground up. Another thing, restoration, science and practice come together. So it's not just Western science versus everything else. It's not following hardcore scientific reports that we fall asleep reading. It's actually using the science of everyone in this room. It's the science of you experiencing your own backyard, informing all of this, because you're the scientists in your own patch. And we really, really value and respect that, and believe that's the most important part of this moving forwards. So, some local examples.
Do you want to just leave that, because Dan gave a good example of how that is. But these are realistic in the sense that these are realistic sized wetlands that you have on your own properties, really.
Sorry, I didn't get the PowerPoint memo. So I suppose the point of this presentation was to inspire you guys to think about what can biolinks look like in our own backyard. Where can we move forwards together? And that's the conversations that we've been having with Sally and Stephen and Crockett behind the scenes, is what can we do using this knowledge, using these experts in our own area, what can we do? And that's open to all of you, not just to us.
And I guess just for me to end is, as any good cricketer will tell you, except we didn't do it in England, get on the front foot. And this self sort of determination is going to be more important in this than it's probably been in your lifetimes of farming, because Woolworths and all of these other guys, they will get on top of it first and they will dictate how that comes to you. It is all measurable. What that measurement comes out at, I don't actually know how that will work, but you should also be involved in that somehow. I have no idea how that will operate. Socially, it's also measurable. How that goes into the market will be an interesting aspect. So, for instance,
but it will. We know that it is. The social aspect as well as the environmental aspect it's in there. It's
Yeah.
coming in the market.
So you have environmental social governance. That's the big. It used to be called social corporate responsibility. Now it's called environmental social governance. So they have to have a social component of it. They can't just concentrate on birds and bees and fogs and things like that. That then they can, in some ways, take away from you possibility to, conserve this, which means get rid of humans. The social connection and component of that somehow will have to come into it, and that's a really good opportunity for you to be able to show where that measurement or that the real guts of it can be.
And we can demonstrate how
and
it's
we
done.
can demonstrate that. Those small fish you saw that we cooked up outside here, I can tell you exactly the health benefits that they'll provide. If you fed those to your children in the first 1,000 days of life, happy days. So that's the basis of that from a health perspective of measurement. So,
Yeah. I think that's about us. Thank you.
All right, thank you. To introduce the Malone Institute's Carolyn Hall and Jack Smart. We, at the heart of this project, we decided to, really early on, talk to, because we're water people, as we're just talking about aquatic tribes, other water people, and the Malone Institute their methods are United Nations endorsed. They are doing some amazing projects right around Australia now, and so Carolyn's going to tell us about that, but also tell us. Jack has been to the Biolink, and he's part of our co-design team. He's spent quite a lot of time with Crockett and Stephen in probably the wettest wettest few years of your lifetime, maybe. No, not quite. Anyway, not entirely. Right. Okay. Thanks, Crockett, for confirmation. But Jack will tell us about the days out at the Sheepwash Lagoon and different reaches within the proposed Biolink. We'll go with Callum first. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Now, let me see if I can organise the technology. We're pretty excited to be here, to be honest. The work that you guys, this project that you've started it's right up our alley. It's the sort of thing that we do. And hearing Wardy talk this morning about the challenge around the market access for these type of projects that is coming. How do farmers take advantage of that? This is right up our alley, and we are, I guess, we're deeply involved in the how-to. The projects that we do in partnership with rural communities around Australia are really about how we do this stuff. How do we implement it on the ground? And it looks a little bit different everywhere we go. Every community is different, every landscape is different, every challenge that is faced is different. But the connection that we have around all these projects is the way water moves through the landscape, the way water is stored in the landscape, and the way water cycles in the landscape has changed. And then Jack's going to talk to you about actual hydrological design of the biolinks, and that's pretty exciting. So I'll get the kind of fancy intro bit over, and the real juice is what Jack's going to talk to you about. Okay, so we come at this work from a little bit of a different perspective than most. We're actually a not-for-profit, and we were founded in 2011 by a man called Tony Coote. Some of you may be familiar with the Angus and Coote jewellery stores of old. So Tony was part of that family, and he came, I guess, from a position of privilege. So a very different perspective that he had. But he had a really major concern about food and water security for this country. And so that thinking, that concern, led to him exploring a whole range of different approaches that probably would now come under the regenerative agriculture umbrella. And it was with that thinking in mind that he set up the Malone Institute, and that's sort of where we come from. Incredibly generously, he has donated 2 farms to us on the southern tablelands of New South Wales, and we really use those as our living laboratory. They're research farms for us, but they're also part of a project that I'll talk about in a moment, the Maloon Rehydration Initiative, which is a catchment scale landscape rehydration project, and we do that in partnership with 23 landholders. Tony understood that to create an organisation like the Maloon Institute, you had to have some kind of funding model, because John's reference to grants and the welfare wagon, if you like, for NRM groups, it's really tough, it's really hard, and there's no certainty in it. Jack and her team can attest to that. So Tony had the understanding of that, so he had the idea that we needed a viable financial model. Now, it's still a challenge for us, but part of that was having these 2 farms on the southern tablelands, and one of those supports an egg enterprise, and we produce at the moment around about 80,000 eggs a week, and they go to market, and they're from a pasture-raised, free-range, chemical-free egg enterprise, and they're absolutely the best eggs money can buy, and we need to sell lots of them so that we can do more work. But Tony also understood that lots of people would come to Maloon, they'd see the projects that we're doing, they'd learn about our approach, and some of them would go home and quite successfully implement that work, but for other people they'd need advice. So we also set up Maloon Consulting as a fee-for-service business so that we could help other farmers do this work. So who are we? Everything that we're talking about today is, it's massive change. Like, this is a big change. This is a change that we're asking farmers to make in how we see our farms and how we see our landscapes. It's change in our production methods when we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint, when we're trying to build our natural capital. It's change, and so we really we're advocates for that change, and we understand how challenging change can be, and that people need support and help in understanding where they are now, seeing where they want to be in terms of their production systems, and how they get there. We're all sorts of different professions, I guess, that we've brought together to build this team. We're focused on good governance. We take that really seriously. That's really important to us. But also, as Jack mentioned, we're internationally recognised, which is, it's pretty cool, and it opens some really interesting conversations that we wouldn't otherwise have. So the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, it's a mouthful, but basically it's an international recognition that we can have sustainable farming approaches that build biodiversity and that build things like carbon, and they can be good for farming communities. I've got to get a wriggle on. So that's just the definition of what landscape rehydration is, and I mentioned it previously. It's all about recognising that the way water moves through the landscape has changed, and that we want to restore that, we want to bring that back, and that's a really important thing to do. Hang on. There we go. And how do we do it? We work with farmers, and we had the privilege last night of staying with Wendy McDonald and having a deep dive into some of the politics and pain of what's gone on here in the not so distant past, and really the work that we do, we create social projects that have all these other benefits, and these projects are social. And hearing Maggie and John talk just now, this opportunity to make this project your own. We've worked with other communities to do this, and the project that we've done at Maloon, these projects require honest and open conversations. So when we started the Maloon project, there were neighbours to the pilot project, neighbours to Tony's properties that said, who is this wealthy man coming into our valley, potentially stealing our water? Like, what's going on here? And they were incredibly sceptical and quite rightly a little bit cross about this man that had what they perceived as privilege coming into the valley and making these changes. Tony had a very philosophical view about this and just said, well, if it doesn't work, I'm going to rip it out. Like, let's give it a go, because at the moment what we're facing is an area of a really degraded creek and with little natural value, and our floodplains are dried out and they're not productive, so let's give it a go. And so in lots of ways, luckily, that community gave him that licence to have a go initially on his own property. And then what he also did was take an approach of bringing the community along, to invite everybody in, to have a look, to be involved also in the citizen science monitoring. So what John and Maggie have talked about, identifying what to measure and how to measure it, he actually invited people in to do that. And in doing so, built a lot of confidence. And now some of those who were the most critical of that project have become the greatest advocates. Right, I'll get a wriggle on now and run through the rest. Couple of things that we're really proud of. The MRI, and I hope you can all see, but it's that project at Maloon in partnership with 23 landholders across 23,000 hectares and 50 kilometres of creek. I say it really quickly quite often, but it's just amazing. It's amazing, that project. We're really proud of it, and Tony began that project, and the Maloon Institute was centred around that project. We succeeded in securing some NLP2 funding back in 2018 that's enabled us to measure and monitor, and there is a lot of hydrological monitoring equipment across that catchment that mere mortals like us never would have been able to achieve. We're particularly proud that now we've expanded this approach across the country, and the map over here on the left-hand side sort of shows the footprint of our work. Particularly relevant up in the reef catchments, where the need to rebuild wetlands in the stream and restore small water cycles is pressing. We're really proud of our education program. It's something we've spent the last 18 months concentrating on, that acknowledging that farmers need help to make this change, or these changes, that they learn best in small communities of practice, and to do that you've got to build up confidence, you've got to share learnings, you've got to try things out, and you've got to talk about that in small connected groups. A big thing that we're really proud of is to get landscape rehydration embedded in legislation in New South Wales. We've got a landscape rehydration infrastructure guide. It all gets a bit legalese and a bit technical, but essentially we've gone from having to get local council approve our works at a property by property basis. We've taken that and we've given that into state agencies, and now state agencies have to look at our works and approve them. It's still tough when you want to do something at the landscape scale. At Maloon we've got 23 properties, and so we need to get approval on each separate property. When you're trying to do something, nature repair market bill scale, yeah, it's really hard. So we've got some systemic change in this country that we still need to make that's critical. I'm going to run through just some examples now, and I might get Jack to flick the page over so we can run through these pretty quick. These are just examples of our work. This is a leaky weir at Westview as part of the Maloon project. You can see they're a rock and log structure. They're all about slowing the water down, rebuilding the soil carbon sponge, and getting vegetation to re-establish and do the heavy lifting. This is up just south of Darwin in the Northern Territory, a massive big flat contour across a property called Cameron Downs, just holding on to some of that water that happens in the big seasonal rainfall event up there. This is some of our work over in southwest WA. It looks a little bit different there. You don't want to reinstate valley floors and bring salt water to the surface, so we try to hold up water higher up in the landscape. And we use some pretty low risk, small scale interventions like brush weirs in scalded areas. So there's lots of different techniques that we use. This is Queensland in the reef catchments. Everything's bigger in Queensland, including the leaky weirs and the hats. This is a property called Mount Pleasant, and you can see the progress. This is Peter Hazel wielding the chainsaw. But we went from a massive incised gully to basically an intact chain of pond system. Healing that landscape at Mount Pleasant Station healed the family that lived there too. It's really important work. This is some of the work we've done more recently out in the Central Rangelands around Alice Springs. So again, it looks a bit different. You've got a lot less rainfall out there, but similarly, we're trying to restore the way it moves through the landscape. It looks like contours. It looked like brush weirs with the Amadura rangers out there. Just small low-risk techniques that they could repeat across their landscape and across their landholding. Even Balbo the dog is showing there near the rip lines, just really simple rip lines in that environment. Slowed the water down, the grass seed dropped out, the landscape greens up, suddenly you've got vegetation everywhere that's holding on to a little bit more water and allowing a lot more options. Just running through really quickly around enhancing carbon and biodiversity. That's all about what we do. So restoring the soil carbon sponge. It's also about the fun guys and the fun girls that have been having the party underneath our feet for 420 million years. When you start to reduce the synthetic inputs into your environment and you start bringing water back in, then you're rebuilding that soil carbon sponge. When you're restoring and rebuilding wetlands in the stream and you're restoring the way they function, you're attracting biodiversity, and we saw a little bit of that in the earlier slides this morning. When we think about how this work can mitigate the risks to carbon projects, soil carbon particularly is impacted on big fluctuations in rainfall. So when we go from flooding rains to periods of drought, those massive fluctuations can impact on the levels of carbon in the soil. So if we're going to even that out a little bit, if we're going to maintain levels of soil moisture over space and time, we're going to mitigate some of those impacts, and they're going to be good. No, that's all right. If we think about, that's all right, we can go. If we think about nature-based solutions and some of what we've talked about this morning, some of the access to markets, some of the task forces that Wardy's referred to, it's not just about being seen to be good, it's actually about nature-based solutions that deliver. So they deliver not just environmental outcomes, but they deliver for communities that live there, and that's rural communities and that's Indigenous communities that live on country. So there are massive changes coming. I'm a born optimist, so I'm a little bit less cynical than, and I'm not looking at him too hard, than lots of other people. I really do believe that these changes, these task forces can make a difference and that they can advantage our rural communities. And we just need to be organised and working together to take advantage of that change. I'm not going to talk about the next slide because I think we've talked enough about those task forces, but what I would encourage you to do is just be thinking about it, and this is a fantastic project, and working together you're stronger. And for those that are going to help you access the markets, they will come thick and fast because you've got the assets here and they're going to be chasing them because they're going to make $1. And so as a community, holding tight and looking after one another, not signing on to anything too quickly, having a good hard look at those agreements and getting your legal advice and talking it through, that's where you're going to be stronger. I'll hand over to Jack now.
All right, so I'll just run through some initial sort of landscape rehydration opportunities for the biolink site. My colleague Annabelle and I had the pleasure of spending a day up with Stephen Crockett and Sally on their 2 properties, Gone Station and Moola, a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, just to run through some initial ideas of what that might look like from a landscape rehydration perspective. And it's really not rocket science or looking to reinvent the wheel. It's possibly just looking through a slightly different lens of, you know, not just seeing these lagoons in isolation from, you know, purely from an environmental perspective, but through the lens of landscape function. So, and as much as possible, catchment scale outcomes, productive agriculture, social and community outcomes as well. So, but look, just I guess just to give you an initial snapshot. So this initial assessment has looked at the 2 properties, Gone Station and Moola. We've got the Merrin Creek essentially running right through the biolink site, connecting the Murray to the Wakul. So that's obviously the significant riparian area that we've got to work with as a major asset, as well as obviously a rich biodiverse corridor in itself. So that's the focus of what we're looking at. In terms of the conceptual designs, yeah, honing in on these biolink areas 4 and 5. So we're looking upstream of Gone Road, and a couple of key assets within that is the Sheepwash Lagoon and Horseshoe Lagoon. Yeah, so both a fairly significant area within the total biolink site. So I guess initially we wanted to have a look at the hydrology, and this is indicative, and just to give a sense of what the hydrology of these wetlands and the Merrin Creek more broadly looks like. So to do that, we've sort of had a look at the hydrological modelling at Turrumbry Weir. So I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but it's just to give a sense of, you know, referring back to Colin and Dan and Ant's presentation, and that great slide they had showing the species numbers and the number of breeding species of water birds, and the critical couple of years there where they were able to continue water going into the Polac, and then with the resulting floods coming in after that, the impact that that's then had on the ability for these species to get into really up the ante in terms of breeding. So if we think about the hydrology of these wetlands through that lens, we've got 2 important indicators, frequency and duration. So I don't like the term natural, but that's what the modelling refers to. But if we think about it as the old hydrology perhaps, or pre-European, so indicatively getting into the flow range of 30 to 35,000 megs a day at Turrumbry, which would see the Sheepwash and Horseshoe lagoons inundate with water. That would have happened in the order of 7 years in 10, give or take. Currently, you're looking at, that's a reduction down to about 3 years in 10 now. In terms of duration, 30 to 40 days being crunched down to 10 to 20 days. So, as a broad objective, we can look at that reinstating or bridging the gap between the old hydrology and the current hydrology. So, from a landscape rehydration perspective, that's sort of what we're looking to do, restoring that hydrological regime, and the ecology will hopefully come in behind that. So the two sites here, we've got the Sheepwash Lagoon and the Horseshoe Lagoon. I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but essentially what we've got here is the natural inlet to Sheepwash Lagoon, has a man-made cutting on it, but a man-made bank on it, but there is a historical cutting and regulator there now, which is the current way that lagoon naturally fills with water. So, and indicatively, that inundation is occurring when flows in the Murray sort of get to that 25,000 plus mark, and we're looking at a full maximum inundation around 35,000 megs a day. And here's some photos of the Sheepwash Lagoon. So this is the man-made bank. This is the irrigation channel within Sally and Crockett's property as a means of getting water to the Sheepwash Lagoon as well. And this is the regulator on the cutting at the day we were there when the peak flows were coming through. So just sitting there under the water where there's a bit more acceleration in the flow that you can see there. The other side is the Horseshoe Lagoon, so that's on Stephen's property, Moola. This is the natural, this X here is the natural commence to flow point for that lagoon. There's no regulated structure or any way to control that, so and its hydrology is a bit different to the Sheepwash Lagoon in terms of it doesn't have a natural sill to sort of hold the water in there for a longer period of time. So it tends to have a lower commence to flow, so it will more frequently inundate, but a lower duration as the flows recede when the Merrin Creek reduces down. So yeah, just a few photos. This is, again, peak inundation from this recent flow event, but this is roughly where the natural inflow to Horseshoe Lagoon is. We've got some black box just to the side as well, which is an indicator of perhaps the different hydrology for the Horseshoe Lagoon relative to the Sheepwash Lagoon just downstream. And again, on this outside bank of the Horseshoe Lagoon, we've got some big black box there as well. And this photo here is irrigation channel through Stephen's property, which runs adjacent to the Horseshoe Lagoon and is potentially a means of getting some water to that site. So, looking at some options for rehydration. So, with a focus on Sheepwash Lagoon and Horseshoe Lagoon as some potential initial sites that have some opportunities to rehydrate and restore the hydrological regime. So, Sheepwash Lagoon at first look and bouncing ideas with Stephen and Sally, it's got infrastructure there, so we're pretty lucky in that respect. We've got the cutting and regulator which can enable the overbank flow events to inundate the Sheepwash Lagoon, and then the ability to close the regulator to achieve your duration that you're after. But you've still then got the gap there between those natural overbank events and the years when it's a bit dry, but we want to maintain the flows in there. There's opportunities for that through a disused regulator off the Little Murray, which could potentially tap into some unregulated flows opportunistically, and as well as the pump station and internal irrigation network to utilise the channels to feed the water into the Sheepwash Lagoon. So some initial thoughts is that there's an opportunity to utilise that existing infrastructure perhaps in a prioritised way to achieve a restored hydrological regime for that lagoon. Horseshoe regulator is a bit of a different story, but there is perhaps an opportunity to consider a small regulating structure on the Horseshoe Lagoon, which would enable the natural overbank flows to fill the Horseshoe Lagoon and then to close that up to achieve the duration of inundation that you're after, as well as potentially to supplement that through Moore's irrigation infrastructure to do a managed watering as well. So looks like there's some opportunities there for both of those lagoons with utilising existing infrastructure as well as some small potential new infrastructure, and working with some good people like the Murray-Darling Wetland Working Group potentially, you know, to deliver water in a way that's going to achieve the long-term objectives for those sites. Yeah, and really get these ecosystems in a sustained, ongoing management regime. Thinking a bit more outside the box, there's also the opportunity to consider what would a reach-based solution look like for this. So as an example, and referring back to the Balloon Rehydration Initiative and the series of in-stream structures, it gets very complex once we get into the main creek and the regulated system, obviously, but just conceptually, what would an in-stream structure upstream of Gordon Road look like that achieved a rehydration of the whole riparian zone along Merrin Creek back up through this system? And a structure could conceptually be designed at a height that would achieve the inundation regime for both of these lagoons, with consideration to what that means for overall large flooding flows as well. But I think it's worth at this early stage looking at that bigger picture of, well, what if we, instead of treating these as individual sites, looked at treating the whole reach, which then could be replicated up through the system to achieve a full biolink outcome. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell the initial ideas, but I guess some broader benefits of rehydrating these biolinks that I think we really think are important points. So it's really around that increased storage and cycling of water. But we're not just looking at water, we're looking at these wetlands and these critical riparian areas as key filtering, retention and cycling zones for nutrients, and increasing the biodiversity of these areas and using that biodiversity to cycle the nutrients back up through the landscape. Also, as key drought refugia sites as well within this broader landscape for those dry years that are inevitable, and increase productivity and landscape resilience. And I think that might be it.
We also were lucky to invite the Murray-Darling Wetlands Working Group and Sasha and Sarah Nim to be part of the co-design. So I know, well, thank you. It's mutual. There's mutual admiration society going on with water people. So the operative word in the title of that organisation is working, and Sasha's here to tell us what they do. They go under the radar quite a bit, although they're quite well known by people in this room. Why I love them is that they get water. And they get water to the right places, and they make it work, and they make it work consistently for 30 years. Being part of this co-design team is that we want to see more water and more consistent water as a part of what we're doing here. And if markets come to play, as philanthropy has done for the working group, and there's a hybrid mix of these things. There's more water in the landscape, and there's more opportunities to access markets and have productive landscapes. Sorry, Sash.
Oh, thank you. And I'll keep it really brief, because I appreciate it. Yep, thank you. Thank you very much. It is an absolute pleasure for us to be here today, listening to everybody's discussions and presentations this morning. We sort of dovetail really nicely in this co-design. Jack, you did a wonderful presentation on the hydrologies with regards to sheep wash and horseshoes. So you've saved a whole lot of legwork there. That's exactly what the working group does. So, Sarah, where are you? Raise your hand. That's my other colleague there. So please drop us a line and say good day today. Working group, 30 years young. I just wanted to let you all introduce people who might be more familiar with our old logo. We've sort of revamped a little bit, trying to get with the modern society with the times. But I thought I'd just stick this map in this presentation just to let you know that we've been doing this environmental water management thing for a number of decades, and this is the MIL region in the early 2000s. So just to let you know that we work predominantly with private property landholders. So freehold landholders, Western land leases. We save national parks and public assets for the government agencies. Now, not to say that we don't get involved in those as well, but we find that working with private landholders who are not conservationists, John. I don't know if I'm a conservationist either, but I do appreciate we've got to work, we've got to eat and clothe ourselves. So working group works with people. We work alongside your commitments. So, for example, out at Win Leighton, there's a very large super fund. I won't say who, but they have irrigation commitments right now. Now, I also have interests in this creek. It's got bell frogs and bitterns possibly and other endangered plants. Well, irrigation time is now. So I will take a back seat and wait my turn, I suppose. And we work together like that. So I'm a toothless tiger in the sense that I want to be involved and I work around you and your commitments. So looking at this wonderful map behind us, the working group has quite a lot of different places that we water as well. So locally, I drive through here every month to do various activities that we do, and we do fly under the radar. We're kind of like the silent achiever, but our range goes through to the South Australia border, up through to Pincarry, down Swan Hill, even sort of Rushworth and Shepparton way. So I'll introduce our staff a little later. So long and short of it is that we work with private property, private landholders. We deliver environmental water, or water with an environmental tag. If you go onto our website, there's a little bit of a history on it, which I'll save you the run through now, but basically it's a trust that we receive water from, and they manage a water portfolio for sophisticated investors, and we get a ration or a portion of it. In wet years we get more, in dry years we get less. So here's an example down in where I live. I'm in Mildura, and this is Andruka Lagoon. And Andruka Lagoon is a property run with sheep. Now, it coincides with sheep, so whilst where possible, the sheep stocking is reduced or removed, fenced off somewhere else while there's water in the wetland. So we're very rubbery and very flexible. I appreciate, as I said, we've got to eat. This one's for you, John. So we also are part of very important conservation programs, and this is out far west New South Wales near Lake Victoria. This is the endangered, you might think it's whitebait, it's the endangered Murray hardyhead. So we've had hundreds of thousands of them in a little tiny creek, maybe about 10 hectares in size. So it's a big stick of water that we use, but it's a humongous impact and outcome. We also work with, so tapping into the threatened species market if you want to do that. And there's no way that we can tell you to stop what you're doing. We work with you. But there are loads of wonderful species that we come across. Saros is our photographer there, and these photos were taken out at Guyenne in the Murrumbidgee, and that's also a place where we do lots of work. The other thing that the working group can do to assist is we will go through the licensing for you, and the Malone Institute did a wonderful example of the stuff that you have to go through, local council, state, federal, and to deal with approvals, whether it's a regulator, a culvert, a pump, and then up to the standards that New South Wales are so far imposing on us all. So we work with people to achieve those things as well. We have a little bucket of money to help with infrastructure, so we could possibly, in sites that we look at, feel that we can assist, invest in that as well. And it's a together investment. We are a charity, just like the Malone, a non-government organisation, just working to do things. We're very nimble and agile because of that. And that's our wonderful stuff. That's my final slide. As I said, I'm a bit nervous getting up here, but please touch base with us during refreshments and lunch. We look forward to working in this biolink. So this region is very special to me, and I've been working in the industry since moving here in 2008. So yeah, when Jackie called me, I jumped, I leapt to be part of this. So thank you. Please touch base with us.
We've got about 20 minutes before lunch. The next two speakers, so we're going to hear from Josh Campbell from Murray Local Land Services, and then after that we'll hear from Wardy, who is back again, but this time with a focus to tell us about a major grant success that the Regen Farmers Mutual and also Western Murray and 3 other locations are going to share over the next couple of years. Josh, if you want to come up this way. Josh, it's really great that you're here, and we've got Kathleen Bartlett, who unfortunately had to go away for a month in Italy on some hardship mission, but she is the environmental markets representative, really, for Murray Local Land Services. Doing a great job on a massively steep learning curve, and very generous with what she's finding and convening and bringing people together on. And the good luck, our good luck, is that LLS is on the front foot, which you're going to tell us all about. But here to help us and here to work, and Kathleen's also part of the co-design team as well. So we're aligned that this biolink and others are aligned with what you can do for us. Yes. You're welcome.
No, thank you for that, and thank you for the invite to come along. Yes, obviously, Kathleen is away in Italy at the moment. She would love to be here, but she sort of suggested that maybe Italy was a bit more interesting for the moment. So I'm Josh Campbell. I work for the Murray Local Land Services in the environment team. So Murray Local Land Services is basically a combination of the old catchment management authorities and the old LHPA, so Livestock Health and Pest Control. So we work with community and landholders and land managers in environmental programs, but also we the Livestock Health and Pesticide Authority side of things works with landholders. We have district vets, we have agronomists, we work in biosecurity and emergency management and pest and weed control. So looking at a state level, LLS is really focusing on natural capital and environmental markets. Obviously it's a very key topic at the moment, and you're here for a reason that there's a lot of changes happening, and so LLS at the state level is trying to look at how we can assist landholders across the state. They're doing this by increasing their capacity to provide independent advice. And probably the key there is the independent advice. Obviously being a government organisation, we're not going to be coming in and suggesting that you should be doing this or that. It's more about being able to try and provide advice, but I think more provide information and being able to bring people in to understand things. Looking at helping landholders understand natural capital and environmental market opportunities available, and then also the benefits and associated risks. And get out providing information to help you as landholders or land managers make the best decisions for your property. So I'll bring it back to a Murray Local Land Services level, so at a regional level now. And so Murray Local Land Services has tried to, I guess, be on the front foot and set up a 3-year plan to, I guess, be involved and see how we can best help the landholders within the region. So we're looking to do this by having 100% of our LLS advisory staff aware of and equipped to inform land managers about environmental markets. And that's, you know, we're learning as well. As you know, as a staff member at Murray LLS, we want to be able to, when we're out talking with landholders for our environmental projects or the district vets are out there, we may not have the answers, but we might be able to at least assist and provide you with where you can get information that you're after. We're looking at 20 community and NRM groups within Murray LLS, groups and Murray LLS partners understanding environmental markets, and so we're doing this, or trying to do this, around through the Murray Riverina Environmental Markets Community of Practice. So this group of community of practice is held every 6 weeks online on a Monday from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. They quite often have guest speakers come along to talk about topics or changes that are happening, and it's just a good way of, I guess, people coming together and learning more about environmental markets and natural capital. So anyone's welcome to join that online forum, and I'll show you Kathleen's contacts at the end, and you'll be able to, if you're interested, to be involved. We're also looking at 200 land managers, looking for them to understand and have the skills to assess environmental markets if they choose on their land, and expanding that to 60 landholders that have we would like to have 60 landholders that actually have a natural capital account for their property. And then we're also looking, we have a long history of working with Aboriginal groups and communities, and we look to, I guess, assist them where we can to understand this as well. So as I suggested, this is sort of, I guess, how we wish to achieve this, how we wish to do what we want to do. So obviously, as I suggested, the Murray Riverina Environmental Markets Community of Practice, looking to continue that into the future. So Carbon and Biosecurity Markets Forum. So we're looking at holding 3 events for landholders and land managers around, I guess, everything to do with carbon, environmental markets and natural capital. Training and workshops, we'll look at having 9 face-to-face workshops for land managers and partners. And this will be, I guess, as we go, as people learn, adapt, things change, we'll look at trying to help people as we go. Like, you know, each time a new technology comes up or a new idea, we'll look to try and, I guess, get that information out to people. For partnerships, we're looking to partner and collaborate with community and, I guess, other government organisations, but I think use our partnerships that we have now. So we have, you know, we'll be along at Henty and things like that. We'll look to use those, I guess, those platforms and those partnerships to get information out to people. So once again, this is back to the 60 landholders. We look to have 60 landholders on board with natural capital accounting plans on their property. So we'll look to assist them with, I guess, being able to measure the baseline natural capital, look to identify improvement practices that they could possibly do on their land, and also help them to deliver that action plan. That'll be done through the to ag extensions, but also the Connected Rivers program. So one-on-one advice, we'll look to a general advice to Aboriginal groups, RLS staff and programs, and partners and land managers. And this is probably once again back to, we have a lot of staff working out on ground with landholders, so look for them to be able to provide advice and provide people with where they could possibly find information. And we'll also have fact sheets and case studies. So there's a couple of fact sheets up the front there around what LLS does and what we're looking to do in the future. So yeah, but we'll obviously change those over time.
Hi, so as I was saying, I thought I was doing this presentation first, so the opening slides are different and it starts with an introduction. But I'm going to move quickly because I know we all want lunch. I had the privilege of having Catherine's lunch last time I was here. It's really good. Alright, so welcome. It seems a bit innocuous. That's me. Regen Farmers Mutual. You can read the slides, so I'll be really quick. Some people have a problem with what is regenerative, and it's not about biodynamic or organic or holistic. It's about making an economic and an environmental profit. And it's really important to have the and. If you make an economic profit, environmental loss, you're really mining your natural capital. If you make an economic loss and an environmental profit, you're in conservation. Regen Ag is an economic and environmental profit. Okay, the reason that we need farmers to work together, I sort of alluded to, and Stephen and Crockett and I were having that chat before. On your own, you kind of lack the scale to make a material difference in a landscape, in an environment, and you lack the scale economically to do a carbon project. By getting together, you reduce the overheads for each of the participants and you increase the scale of the project, and as they scale, you start to tap into additional benefits. Okay, so we mentioned before that it's not just what you produce, it's how it impacts climate and environment that makes a difference going forward. Okay, we're not the only ones that share this philosophy. We are probably the only ones that are kind of working towards landscape impact programs and getting farmers to collectively design what it is that they can do individually and collectively that makes an economic and environmental profit. We've done this in Queensland. We've had the opportunity of testing a landscape impact program in an area called the Trap Rock. Courtesy of the New South Wales Government, we've been given $2 million to do 4 landscape impact programs across New South Wales, and in each of those regions, after a group has co-designed what it is they can do, provide clean energy regulator readiness grants of $10,000 to 10 farmers and $5,000 to another 10 farmers. So all of that seeks to answer these 3 questions. What can we do individually and collectively in the landscape that makes sense, starting with the farmers and then working out to the markets, as opposed to a market top-down, hey, I'm here to grow trees and take your carbon, or hey, I'm here to sequester carbon and put it in my supply chain. We ask you guys, what is it that you can do? And then let's go and market that to the buyers. Who pays? What do they care about? And how do you measure that, right? And how do you make that work? And how do you not just do a transaction at a point in time, but how do you get that transaction to gather its neighbours so you're making more of a landscape impact over time, so it's an open transaction, not a point-in-time transaction. Okay, so it takes 20 weeks, there's a whole bunch of phases in the program. This bit I hope not to bore you with, you can read about it, and we will do a kick-off meeting formally in Western Murray, which is the first thing that you do. You then get the farmers locally to get an onboarding, which collects agricultural data and environmental data, which helps you do a co-design with massive map, and you all sit around and you go, where can we join a state park to a national park, or make a big impact. Field trips, because what you come up with in the office doesn't work if it doesn't work out in the field. Once you've got a clear idea, that's the scoping phase, you need to go and socialise it. So we've usually been in the banks and supply chains and investors, and we say, what do you need? This is what we can do. How far off are we? Let's try and work that out. Then you spend a lot of time iterating and changing and analysing, iterating, changing, until you can communicate to everybody in the session 3 what an open transaction looks like in the open Murray. Standing here today, I definitely don't know what it is. That's not my job, that's the co-designer's job. Once that landscape impact program is done, we take 10 farmers initially and we provide them a full grant, and another 10 farmers we provide them a half grant to do the pre-work, to do the GIS, the Geographical Information Systems, to get eligible interest holder consent, to navigate their banks, permissions and pathways, so that they can register a project with a clean energy regulator. That costs you nothing, but getting to the point where you've got a registered project with a clean energy regulator, that enables you to then access the banks and the other funders that are out there, so that you can plant trees, build fences, put in the measurement and monitoring that makes sense for that particular project. When we're talking about funding, we're not talking about, you know, do something, get carbon, or do something, get a one-off payment. It's about an ecosystem stacking of water, carbon, biodiversity, native species, interoperability around ESG, what are your regional co-benefits. But also there's a stack of transactions economically in there. Some organisations, like philanthropic organisations, want to buy the catalytic and regional co-benefits and employment and things like that. Whereas other people who've got carbon dioxide they need to offset, they're only interested in the offset. So depending on the sorts of benefits that we come up with and the sorts of measurements that are required and what the market tells us, you'll have an ecosystem stack and a funding stack. I'm trying to go quick, tell me if it's too quick, or too slow anyway and you're bored and want to go for lunch. So who's involved? In order to make a co-design team work, we need 10 farmers. Those pilot farmers get a heap of benefits. We take 5 people. Those 5 people each have a role for the 20 weeks. There's a cat herder, there's a business manager, there's a comms person, there's a farmer avatar, and there's a landscape agronomist. Some of them get really busy up front, some of them get really busy at the back, but they all go through this as a core team, and they are engaging to make this happen. Oh yeah, they also get a budget of $30,000 in which to employ marketing and or conservation experts to help them, because they, as the core group, might not have the necessary expertise. We don't tell them what to do with that budget, they work out for themselves. Oh, that's them. That's them. Hey, that's the budget. Look how good this is going now. This is great, you know. Okay, so the outcomes are, we want to understand what are the identified opportunities in this region. Can we get a blueprint that makes it easier for the following farmers that go from 10 to 20 to 100, so that they don't have to travel up all the rabbit holes that the first 10 did. There's that learning, there's that efficiency, it makes it easier. The people that get the bloody noses that have to do the hard work get the grants. The people that don't have to get the bloody noses get the blueprint. Does that make sense? Yeah. Alright, why do we do it this way? Look, this didn't happen by accident. We co-designed the Regen Farmers Mutual. Before that, Rowan and myself created Incubator Co-op, which was an incubator for new cooperative and member-owned organisations. We're kind of used to taking groups of people through a process to help them understand how to create a commercial venture. We also work internationally, because we understand that whilst we are starting to get a grip of the landscape impact program and how to work with farmers to identify what it is they want in the landscape, they are 40% of Australia's landmass. Traditional owners, Crown lands, local councils, national parks, state parks make up the other land. How do we engage those stakeholders that aren't producing food and fibre, but are also pivotal to an environmental outcome? What are the benefits that they're after? So the landscape impact program works with a broader set of stakeholders that aren't farmers to generate these 4 returns. Inspiration, financial, social and environmental. Don't ask me what an inspirational return is. Sounds kind of bollocky. Anyway, other really interesting benefits of co-design. And these are the locations: Northern Rivers, Upper Clarence, Southern Tablelands and Western Murray. So they'll all be going through as a cohort. So Western Murray will get to hear what are the challenges in the Southern Tablelands, how the cat herders and farmer avatars and comms people, what challenges are they coming up to, what hacks have they been able to come up with, and sharing these benefits. The main benefit though is by working together you actually satisfy one of the major top-down initiatives is called the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and when it accounts to nature and land, there are three principles: non-conversion of natural land into agricultural, non-intensification, and doing shit together. If you're doing this as an individual farmer, you will not get your land classified amongst the science-based targets for nature, and so everybody that you're reporting to upstream can't use whatever good works that you're doing. By working together, you're opening more doors for for the good work that you're doing to be recognised and rewarded. Look, we have a general philosophy. Farmers need to look after their own business first. That's make sure you're net zero through either reductions or sequestration or renewable energy or all of those activities that the bank slide had up before that help you get your footprint and everything organised. And then we talk about nearest and dearest. Okay, so as a farmer, you send your kids to school, and the school teacher needs to be employed and needs to have other kids getting to that school, which means we need other industries outside of agriculture. So they're your nearest, and we want to make sure that local industries are supported with the environmental good works that farmers are doing. And then there's your dearest. Okay, these are the people that you already sell your wheat, wool, beef, whatever to. They've got a requirement for insetting. Once you've looked after yourself, your nearest and your dearest, then you've got this safeguard mechanism, the polluters that are compulsorily buying carbon. If you offset now, like if you sell the carbon you generate today to BHP or Rio, that'll help them, continue to do whatever it is that they do that makes money, right? But it's not necessarily an incentive to change. And at some point your nearest and dearest are going to also need their carbon, and you're going to need your carbon in order to keep operations. So look after your own business first, look after your nearest and dearest, and then according to the laws of supply and demand, by the time you go to sell to those compulsory buyers, the price is going to be much more high because there's just limited, less supply coming from farmers. Do it the other way around, just line your foot up. I'm really excited about this particular, I'm excited about all four regions in New South Wales. I won't lie to you, I'm excited about farmers coming together to change things in landscapes. But here you've kind of got everything that you would want in a landscape impact program. You've got food, water, carbon, biodiversity. You've got the main players and main value drivers for economic and environmental opportunities. And then you've got some subordinate sort of core benefits, or super subs as we like to call them, the Sam Kerrs of the Matildas in here. You've got cultural benefits, endangered species, and you've got the opportunity to start whole new industries. I've been talking to Lee quietly about hemp and wool and what can we do for building products and all sorts of other industries that agricultural commodities typically don't go into, and how can that lead to an economic regeneration of this whole area. The other thing you've got is the scientific rigour, and really importantly, by working together as farmers in a region with Western Murray and LLS and those sorts of things, you get to add a layer of what we call MVR in the business, measurement, verification and reporting. Now, when that's done from space, it can tell you that something's turned green. It can't tell you why it turned green. Was it because of a cow horn full of biodynamic wonder juice, or was it urea? And how much did it cost to put on, and how much was the yield that you got off it? It can just tell you that it went green. When you've got humans involved doing MVR, and I can't sign my own homework, but I can sign my neighbour's homework, and my neighbour can sign their neighbour's homework. And none of us are incentivised to cheat because we all go down, right? We're all incentivised, however, to teach one another, hey, this is what I did and this helped. So you get all the benefits of peer-to-peer learning, plus you get peer-to-peer MPR, which enables you to do an extra layer of protection and enables your buyers to feel more comfortable, not less comfortable. I think that's me. Sorry, that was keeping you for lunch.
Ask you a couple of questions. You, Woody and Rowan put on a really successful and really interesting event at Taronga Zoo in their lecture theatre a couple of weeks ago, and they had amazingly very interesting bankers and accountants and lawyers and ecologists and farmers and the whole who's who in the zoo, literally. It was a really great event, and it really showed the momentum that these changes are taking. It's all on the way. It's great, and it was great to be around people who are ahead of their game. One of the speakers I wish was here today, or certainly wanted to come this way, and that was a boutique broker called from a group called Tasman, who should be of interest to people here because while biodiversity markets are emerging and we haven't got legislation backing it, he is saying that it's almost 100% increase for carbon credits if you have that embedded. So I just wanted to give us an indication about who Tasman is, why they exist, why they're so successful, and potentially how nervous who they're selling to are.
Okay, so Tasman Environmental Markets, they're online, you can check them out. They're a carbon broker. I don't have any shares in them, I'm not promoting them. In fact, as the mutual, we'd like to sell your carbon. But Jack's right. He was there to kind of say, look, the spot price for carbon at the moment hovers between $20 and maybe $30, but he's just sold 19 million tonnes, or 19 million accus. Each accu is a tonne of carbon dioxide for something like $57 was his forward price that he gave, so nearly double today's price. Why would somebody who's got to buy something compulsorily pay twice as much as they could get it for on the market today? And the answer is credibility. So Tasman aren't, there are some dodgy carbon brokers. Pretty much if they've got green in their name and they have to tell you, they're dodgy. It's like the person that comes up and says, trust me. Right? But these Tasman Environmental will not do, say, an HIR method, which is one of the methods that has come under criticism by Andrew McIntosh and a lot of scientists for failing to actually draw down carbon, failing to be good. So I think out of all of the HIR projects, they've only done 2 of them, and they're on the east coast of Australia where there's enough water to actually grow trees. They're not in the Nullarbor, they're not, in Alice Springs. Another example, if they're planting trees, TEM already has their 2-degree plan, knowing that they're going to have to report as a 2-degree plan next year. So they won't engage in tree planting activities if they think, according to CSIRO and the climate models, that a 2-degree plan means that trees can't survive in that location, get established and continue to grow. And so TEM are just offering around a basic product of carbon this layer of assurance, this layer of biodiversity and other benefits that they can point to their projects having. And what that does for us as Regen Farmers Mutual is inspire confidence that if they can do that, and they're just saying we won't plant shit in dumb places at dumb times, right? But we're saying we're building whole communities with economic models, providing habitat for endangered species. Most of the birds, more birds than kakadu are here, right? If we can wrap a really good narrative around what we're doing collectively and individually, it stands to reason that we can in market get the same sort of price premium as Tasman is able to do, and get to keep it in our pockets instead of seeing that go to third parties.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
How does it go if you're not selling you're retaining your carbon sequestration? How does that? You're not getting a price premium, but you still want to get extra kick for your buck.
Well, then if you're going to retire, inset so you generate carbon and then you retire it, and that's called insetting. So that means that your commodities can pass through without carbon associated with them. If you generate sequestration and carbon dioxide and you want to sell that, that's called offsetting. As I said, with those concentric circles, I'd be more interested in our farmers looking after what can they do to reduce their carbon footprint, what can they do to inset their carbon off their own farm first, and then do the offsetting as a tertiary market when the price is better.
But you can only get that advantage if you sell the commodity. You can't, if you sell the carbon, you can't get that advantage. So, oh, look, my carbon's better.
No, when you're insetting, your access to market and your productivity benefits are the main. Yeah.
Quite a lot. That's right. Quite a lot of farmers will be looking at splitting it three ways. So the first way is to inset and to net out or neutralise their impact. And then the second way is to pay back, possibly in ACCUs. There are some innovative funds that are coming down the line where the capital is provided by them, and then in 4 years' time, when the registered projects kick in, then they pay back in those ACCUs. And the third part of that is to on-sell to very nervous CFOs of large companies that are very worried about their emissions, but also their reputation. So we were just talking about Tasman. The fellow, I can't remember what his name was. Bjorn said that some of these nervous CFOs that don't want to be on Four Corners want to visit. They want high integrity projects, and they almost want to go and see what's happening and not just see the measurement statistics or have a look from the sky. They want to get in amongst it.
And if I had to do a prediction, which you haven't asked for, and I can only get in trouble for doing it, biodiversity is the market for farmers to make our money out of, because that's coming after carbon is biodiversity, and then more broadly ESG. So we will inset our carbon, but we will have that biodiversity value that everybody else, just like they're all emitters of carbon pollution, they're all building higher, further, wider in these urban areas, and they're getting rid of habitat, and they're converting land that was once agricultural into new things. They're intensifying land, and they don't have the numbers of people to actually make a difference. So they're going to become the safeguard mechanism of carbon, but for biodiversity, within years. It'll be 2 to 3 in the early, but it'll be definitely 2030. And so, as farmers, we also are the only ones that have got a really good way of improving biodiversity. And if you're a regenerative farmer, in our definition, you're making an economic and an environmental profit. You probably don't have any insetting requirements on your own biodiversity side, so that'll be all saleable material.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sherelle, for coming as well. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you. It is a bit of a dream team. I'm excited and still feeling lucky. So thanks for coming. And we've got we'll be producing a guide to the Biolink and a kind of a social record of what we come up with. Probably within the next 4 or 5 weeks. So anyone who's interested, that'll be published, and we'll see what we get for reviews. Wanted to say thank you to Roger Knight again for his foresight and his encouragement, and also the Western Murray Board for theirs as well. But the biggest thanks is reserved for Crockett and Stephen and Sally for sticking with us and working it out as we go along. All right.
And I'd like to thank Jack for